Welcome to World Talk Brief. In a really revealing interview with the BBC, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky gave us a rare look inside his strategy. He laid out exactly how he sees the war, his tricky relationship with allies, and his vision for what winning actually means, kicking things off with a claim that pretty much changes how you look at the whole situation.
Wow, that's a heavy statement. He's not saying a third world war might happen. He's saying it's already here. And that right there is the key to understanding his entire mindset. He doesn't see this as some regional conflict. For him, this is the opening act of a much, much bigger global fight.
So, what does he really mean when he says World War III has started? It's not about some future domino effect of alliances falling into place. For Zelensky, it's all about what's happening right now. He basically argues that Russia is trying to force its way of life on everyone, not just in Ukraine, but all over the globe. In his mind, the war in Ukraine is just the main battlefield for this huge ideological struggle. You see, he's way past the point of debating if Putin is a threat. The only questions that matter to him now are the practical ones. How much more land is Putin going to grab, and how do we stop him? This is the lens he uses for every single decision, especially when it comes to all the pressure he's getting to negotiate. And this laser focus on stopping Putin brings us to the biggest immediate challenge he's facing, all these international calls for a ceasefire. But as Zelensky makes crystal clear, the price of that peace is one he's just not willing to pay.
It's a question you hear a lot, right? If giving up some territory could just stop all the fighting, isn't that a fair trade? Well, for President Zelensky, the answer is a hard no.
Okay, so the proposal on the table involves handing over some really strategic areas. But for Zelensky, this isn't about land. He sees it as abandoning hundreds of thousands of his own people. Plus, he's convinced any pause wouldn't bring real peace. He thinks Putin would just use the time, maybe 2 to 5 years, to rearm and get ready for the next attack. And this, right here, gets to the absolute heart of his argument. His responsibility, as he sees it, isn't to lines on a map. It's to the actual people living inside those lines. For him, giving up the land means giving up on the people. And that's just not going to happen.
Now, this pressure for a ceasefire isn't just coming from neutral countries. It's a very real possibility coming from Ukraine's most important ally, the United States, especially with a potential change in leadership. And that, you can imagine, makes things incredibly complicated for Zelensky.
The shift described here is pretty stark. Think about it. After a hypothetical second inauguration for Donald Trump, that whole era of strong support under President Biden would just stop. That flow of U.S. military aid, which has been a total lifeline for Ukraine, would be almost completely shut down.
And this shift wasn't exactly subtle. The source quotes a senior diplomat who calls Zelensky's visit to the Trump White House a pre-planned public diplomatic mugging. Trump basically put him on the spot, in public, telling him to come to the table fast. It was a clear signal that the old rules were out the window.
So even with all this pressure, and even with personal attacks that sound a lot like Russian propaganda, Zelensky's response in public is just simple and direct. He just brushes it off, refuses to get into a war of words, and sticks to the basic facts.
So how do you manage a relationship with an ally when you might not be able to rely on their leader? Well, for Zelensky, the answer is to look past the person and focus on the system itself.
Zelensky makes a really clear distinction here. A promise from a president, any president, can change with the political winds. But a formal security guarantee, one that has to be voted on and approved by the U.S. Congress, that's a different animal. That's a commitment from the institution, and it can outlast any single president. He calls that watertight.
This is his long-term strategy. He's not just thinking about the next weapons delivery, he's trying to build a security system for Ukraine that will actually last. He knows that while presidents come and go, institutions can provide real, durable security.
And he's using this as a bargaining chip. The U.S. has been pushing for Ukraine to hold elections, which have been postponed because of the war. So Zelensky has cleverly tied the two things together. His message is basically a masterclass in diplomacy. You want elections? Okay. First, give us the formal, lasting security guarantees we need to survive.
All right, so with all these challenges, a grinding war, shifting allies, and massive international pressure, what does winning even mean for President Zelensky? The answer shows a leader who is both a big-picture idealist and a boots-on-the-ground pragmatist.
On one level, the goal is totally clear. He defines victory as justice. And for him, that means getting back to the borders of 1991, the year Ukraine declared its independence. That's the long-term, non-negotiable objective.
But, and this is a really big but, he's also a realist.
He knows that trying to achieve that goal today just isn't possible. A full-scale offensive would mean losing millions of people, a price he's just not willing to pay. And second, Ukraine simply doesn't have enough weapons from its partners to make that happen right now.
And that brings us to his more immediate, redefined idea of victory. In the short term, winning means stopping Putin. Just preventing Russia from overrunning Ukraine is, in his eyes, a victory not just for his country, but for the entire world. And that leaves us with his final thought. When he's asked if the world should get ready for a longer war, he describes the situation not as a simple two-player game against Russia, but as a complex game of chess, one that involves many different world leaders. It's a fight on multiple fronts, and the outcome remains totally uncertain. Subscribe to World Talk Brief for more clear, thoughtful explanations.